Imagine being on top of the world, with money, power, and everything anyone could want, but feeling completely empty. Arthur Wallace thought his life was complete until one rainy night changed everything. A scared little girl, a defenseless baby, and an orphanage full of dark secrets that no one dared reveal. What he discovers is not only shocking, but dangerous. And now he must decide, continue living in his comfortable bubble or risk everything to save lives that have been forgotten. Because this story will expose truths you weren't prepared to hear. And the best part? Arthur Wallace was behind the wheel of his Bentley, watching the storm that seemed to swallow the city. Heavy rain pounded against the windshield, the rhythmic sound competing with the low hum of the engine. He felt isolated inside that luxurious car, protected from the world, but not from his own thoughts. Another day, another list of deals that mean nothing. He muttered to himself, adjusting the rearview mirror without really looking. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional silhouettes of pedestrians scurrying for shelter. It was then that he saw it. At the corner of an alley, a small figure was hunched against the wall. He almost ignored it, assuming it was just another shadow created by the dim streetlights, but something made him stop. Arthur looked closer. It was a child, a thin girl, hugging something in her arms. No, someone. A baby. The girl's face was pale, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and despair. He felt a pang in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. What is a child doing here?" he whispered, looking around as if waiting for someone else to take responsibility. But there was no one. He made a decision before he could change his mind, turned the steering wheel and drove into the alley. When he stopped the car, he rolled down the window and spoke, trying not to scare her. "Hey, are you okay?" His voice was softer than he expected. The girl pressed the baby against her, stepping back a little. "Stay away!" he shouted, his voice thin and choked with cold and fear. Arthur raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, slowly getting out of the car. "I won't hurt you, I promise. I just want to help." The girl's eyes narrowed, but she didn't run. He took advantage of the hesitation to take another step. "It's raining a lot. You might catch the flu. Please get in the car. It's warm." "Why do you care?" she asked, distrust evident. Arthur stopped. He himself didn't know the answer. But at that moment, all that mattered was getting them out of there. Because no one should be out here in this rain. Come on, it's safe. She looked at him, then at the baby, and after a few tense seconds, gave a small nod. Arthur bent down, extended his hand and helped her into the car. As he closed the door, the empty feeling that had plagued him for so long began to dissipate. The silence inside the car was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. Arthur stole furtive glances in the rearview mirror, trying to understand the situation without scaring the girl even more. She was huddled in the back seat, with the baby wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering slightly. The car felt huge and cold around them. "What is your name?" Arthur asked, keeping his voice calm. The girl held the baby to her chest and hesitated before answering, as if each word were a risky gamble. "Mia." "And him?" He gestured with his chin toward the baby. "Luke. My brother." Arthur nodded. Mia studied him suspiciously, her eyes moving from the leather seat to his hands firmly on the steering wheel. He was clearly from another world, a world she didn't trust. When they arrived at the mansion, the automatic lights turned on, revealing the house's imposing facade. Mia's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. Arthur walked around the car and opened the door for her, but Mia didn't move. "It's safe. I promise." He extended his hand. Slowly, she got out of the car, carrying Lucas. Upon entering the house, the welcoming warmth contrasted with the damp cold that still clung to them. Mia stood in the hall, her eyes scanning the spacious space. Everything felt more like a museum than a home. Come on, I'll get you something dry to change into. Arthur pointed to the sofa in the living room. Sit down. I'll be right back. I prefer to stand. Mia replied, her voice low but firm. Arthur paused for a moment, realizing it would be difficult to gain his trust. He came back with a soft blanket and an old t-shirt. I don't have children's clothes, but this will do for now. Mia wordlessly took the blanket, wrapping it around Lucas before sitting on the floor next to the couch, far from any obvious comfort. Arthur felt a lump in his throat when he saw that, but decided not to insist. Mia, I don't know what happened to you, but... He hesitated, choosing his words. You are safe here. No one will hurt you. Mia looked up, assessing him for a moment. Then, for the first time, her face softened a little. But she remained silent. Arthur understood. This would take time. The next morning, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Arthur prepared a cup while watching Mia and Lucas in the living room. She still looked suspicious, but at least she was now sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on Arthur whenever he moved. Have you guys eaten anything yet? He asked, trying to sound casual. Mia shook her head, holding Lucas with one hand while adjusting the blanket with the other. I'll prepare something for you. He hesitated. What do you like to eat? Anything is fine. Mia's response was as neutral as her expression, but there was a tone of tiredness in her voice. Minutes later, Arthur placed a plate of toast and fruit on the table in front of her. He sat down in a nearby armchair, trying to break the silence. Mia, I want to help you, but I need to understand what happened. He took a sip of coffee before continuing. You mentioned a place called Cedarwood Haven last night. Is it an orphanage? Mia nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the plate but not touching the food. That's where we lived. His voice was almost a whisper. But they sent us away. Valerie said we were getting in the way. Arthur frowned. Valerie? Who is she? The director. She doesn't like kids who... Mia stopped, hesitating. What? Arthur encouraged, softening his tone. They ask a lot. Mia finally looked at him. She said she couldn't keep us there. He said there was no space. Arthur felt a wave of indignation, but kept his face impassive so as not to alarm her. That doesn't seem right. He leaned forward. Were you safe there? No. The word came out as a faint whisper, but the impact was enormous. Sometimes we went hungry. Other times, we slept on the floor. Arthur took a deep breath, processing the information. He knew something was wrong, very wrong. The idea of children being treated like this in a place that was supposed to protect them bothered him deeply. You deserve much more than that. He looked at her with determination. I'll do something about it. Mia frowned, confused. Why? You don't even know us. Arthur smiled slightly. Maybe it's time I started doing the right thing. Arthur walked through the halls of City Hall, the fluorescent lights casting a cold glow on the beige walls. He clutched the folder in his hands, containing documents that needed answers. The employee behind the counter looked up when he saw him approaching. Can I help? He asked, with a disinterested tone. I'm looking for information about Cedarwood Haven, Arthur replied, trying to remain calm. I want access to the orphanage's financial and operational records. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable. This type of information is not available to anyone. It's confidential. Arthur leaned lightly on the counter, his expression serious. I'm not just anyone. He discreetly placed a business card on the counter, which revealed his name and status as one of the city's greatest philanthropists. I'm considering investing in local charities, but I need to understand what I'm dealing with. The employee hesitated for a moment before sighing. Wait here. I'll see what I can do. A few minutes later, Arthur was taken to a back room where the smell of old paper and dust seemed to permeate the air. The employee placed a stack of files on the table. That's all we have from the last 10 years. Don't take anything away. Arthur nodded and began leafing through the documents. At first, everything seemed in order, activity reports, donor lists, financial records. But as he delved deeper, the story began to change. Incomplete reports, substantial donations with no clear destination, and transfers of children to unspecified locations. Something didn't make sense. He stopped at a page labeled Valerie Harper. Directories she signed showed exorbitant expenses vaguely justified as building improvements, with no evidence that these improvements had been made. "Who are you, Valerie?" he muttered, moving on to another file. Then he found something that made his blood run cold. An internal memo mentioned special relocations, without details about who the children were or where they were going. Arthur stood up, the document in hand, feeling a growing weight. He knew Valerie was at the center of something dark. Leaving the room, the employee gave him a curious look. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I found something that needs answers," he replied seriously. When he got back to the car, Arthur was certain. He couldn't ignore what he had seen. This was much bigger than he imagined. Arthur typed quickly on his cell phone, his fingers nervous as he looked at the lit screen in the dark of his living room. He needed help, someone who knew how to deal with delicate situations like that. After a few seconds, the call connected. Michael Harris. "Who speaks?" The deep and direct voice on the other side sounded familiar and comforting. "Michael, it's me, Arthur Wallace. I need your help." His voice carried urgency. There was a pause. "Arthur? I thought you retired from dirty work. What is happening?" Arthur took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "I found something I can't ignore. An orphanage called Cedarwood Haven. Children disappearing. Financial records altered." He hesitated. "It's a bigger mess than I can solve alone." Michael laughed softly, but without humor. "It looks like you found a hornet's nest. Do you have proof?" "Some. City Hall documents, records of suspicious expenses. But I need something more solid. I need someone who knows where to look." On the other end of the line, the silence was interrupted by a sigh. "You know this isn't simple. These people don't leave easy traces. And if they are involved in something illegal, they will protect it at all costs. I know, Michael, but we are talking about children. They are suffering, and I will not stand by." There was another moment of silence before Michael responded. "All good. Meet me tomorrow at my office. Let's see what we can find out." Arthur hung up, the weight of the conversation still present. He looked at the documents spread out on his desk. Each sheet was a piece of a puzzle he was barely beginning to understand. He had no doubt that Valerie knew something much darker. Hours later, while analyzing the papers for the umpteenth time, Arthur had a feeling that something was wrong. He looked up and noticed a shadow moving outside the window. His heart sped up. He stood up slowly, away from the light, and peered through the curtain. A black car was parked across the street. It wasn't familiar, and the driver seemed to be just waiting. A chill ran down his spine. He was being watched. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to calm his thoughts. This only confirmed what he already knew. He was messing with something much bigger than he imagined. Arthur adjusted the knot of his tie, watching his reflection in the rearview mirror before getting out of the car. He was parked outside Cedarwood Haven, the orphanage that now looked more like a fortress than a shelter for children. The barred windows and high walls conveyed an unsettling coldness. He took a deep breath before picking up the folder with documents and leaving. Valerie Harper opened the front door before he could even knock. Tall, elegant, with a polite smile, she extended her hand. "Mr. Wallace, it's a pleasure to welcome you." His voice was as controlled as his posture. Arthur shook her hand, forcing a cordial smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I want to better understand the work they do here. I'm interested in contributing to noble causes." She tilted her head, her smile remaining intact. "Of course. Come. I'll show you what we do." The hallways of the orphanage were silent, even too clean. Few children were visible, and those he saw walked silently, with downcast looks. Valerie led him through each room, telling rehearsed stories about how the place worked. "We do the best we can with the resources available." She pointed to an empty cafeteria. "But there are always challenges." Arthur gestured to his surroundings. "It seems like a well-organized space. How many children do you currently have?" She hesitated, an almost imperceptible detail. "About 50. His answer was direct, but something in his tone sounded artificial. He nodded, feigning interest as he took in the details. Locked doors, fleeting glances from employees rushing past. When they reached the boardroom, Valerie invited him to sit down. The environment was spacious, but devoid of any human warmth. "So, Mr. Wallace, what would be your intention in supporting us?" She crossed her hands on the table, her eyes fixed on him. Arthur kept his tone casual. "Before committing, I like to understand where the resources are going. For example, I read about the improvements made to the building. Could you tell me more?" Valerie leaned back, her smile now tighter. "Naturally, every penny is used for the well-being of children. I can send detailed reports if you prefer." Arthur noticed the growing discomfort in her posture, but didn't pressure her further. He knew he would need more evidence before confronting her directly. When he said goodbye, Valerie walked him to the door, her smile carefully restored. "I hope you will consider our cause, Mr. Wallace." Arthur smiled back. "I have a lot to think about." When he got back to his car, he felt the weight of his visit. Valerie wasn't just cautious. She knew something was up. He was sure he was close to discovering the truth. Arthur analyzed the documents spread across Michael Harris's desk. The evidence was connecting, but there was still something missing that would transform suspicions into unquestionable accusations. Michael crossed his arms, watching him seriously. "Is that enough to take her down?" Arthur asked, lifting one of the sheets. Michael shook his head. "Not yet. We need a final piece, something that ties everything together. If Valerie is trafficking children as we suspect, she won't be doing it in plain sight. We need to act quickly before she covers her tracks." Michael's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. He answered and listened in silence before hanging up. "I just got a tip. Valerie is planning to move some kids tonight. A private flight leaves the airport at 4 in the morning. Michael looked at Arthur. "This is our chance." Arthur felt his heart accelerate. He knew the moment had come. He looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. "We have to go now." He stood up, picking up the most important documents. "We can't allow her to get away with this." Michael nodded, already grabbing his coat and warning his team. As they drove to Cedarwood Haven, the tension in the car was palpable. The plan was clear: enter discreetly, find the children, and gather evidence that would guarantee that Valerie would be arrested. When they arrived, the orphanage was quiet, but dim lights illuminated the area outside. Michael gestured for the team's agents to take their positions. Arthur followed behind, feeling every muscle in his body tense. "No errors," Michael muttered before opening a side door with special tools. Inside the building, the hallways seemed even darker at night. Arthur was guided by the low noises coming from an office. Approaching, he peeked through the crack in the door and saw Valerie on a call. His voice was firm, but there were traces of nervousness. "They need to be at the airport in 2 hours. Make sure no one knows." She hung up, picking up a briefcase. Michael signaled, and the team split up. As the agents surrounded Valerie, Arthur headed to the dorms, where he found a group of children huddled together in silence. His frightened eyes confirmed everything. "Everything is fine. I'm here to help," he whispered, trying to calm them down. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the hallway. Valerie appeared, her eyes burning with fury. "You! What do you think you're doing here?" Arthur didn't back down. "Exposing you. This ends now." Valerie tried to flee, but officers detained her. While being handcuffed, she screamed, "Do you think you can save everyone? This won't end here." Arthur felt the weight of the night as he carried the children to safety. He knew the battle was far from over, but this victory was crucial. The sun was beginning to rise as Arthur looked out the window of the police station. Outside, the world continued its course, but inside, something had changed profoundly. Valerie Harper was in custody, and the children were safe. It was a small step in a fight he knew would be long. Mia and Lucas were sitting on a nearby bench, exhausted but together. Arthur approached, kneeling to be at their level. "Everything is fine now." His voice was soft but firm. "You are safe." Mia looked at him, her eyes still filled with distrust, but there was something new there, hope. "What will happen to us?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Arthur smiled slightly. "You are going to a place where no one can hurt you, and if you want, I'll be there to help." Lucas, who until then had been quiet, held Arthur's hand. "Aren't you leaving?" Arthur felt his heart sink. He had never considered such a close role in their lives, but at that moment he knew he couldn't walk away. "No, I'm not going anywhere." His response was immediate, coming from an instinct he didn't know he had. While the agents took care of the final procedures, Mia began to relax, allowing herself a slight smile. Lucas dozed in his arms, finally at peace. Arthur felt something that had eluded him for a long time, a true purpose. Days later, in court, he testified against Valerie and presented the evidence that had been gathered. Her conviction was the beginning of a larger dismantling of the scheme involving Cedarwood Haven. Despite the victory, Arthur knew that there was still much to be done. Back at his home, the atmosphere had completely changed. Mia and Lucas played in the garden, their laughter filling the previously empty space. Arthur watched them from the balcony, a calm smile on his face. He knew the road would be long, but for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Mia ran up to him, holding a drawing. "I did this for you." She showed a drawing of 3 figures holding hands, her, Lucas, and Arthur. Arthur looked at her, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you, Mia. It's the most valuable gift I've ever received." As the sun set, Arthur felt he had found his redemption. It wasn't money, power, or status that filled the void. It was love. It was family.